Hello everyone. In this week's tutorial, because I have taught harmony concepts in the last two videos, I'd like to go over the difference between chords and arpeggios. Chords are simply multiple notes played at the same time to give you a distinct sound, and are generally composed of 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, or 6 notes at a time. Although 3 notes is the most common in Western music, and is referred to as triads. Although not every chord that is made up of 3 notes is called a triad, because it depends on the difference in pitches between the 3 notes. And a triad specifically has the second note 3 semitones above the first note, and the third note 3 semitones above the second note. Although most basic chords you will hear about are different than triads, and can be classified as major chords, minor chords, diminished chords, and augmented chords. In a major chord, the second note is 4 semitones above, and the third note 7 semitones above the fundamental note. A minor chord is very similar, except the second note is 3 semitones above rather than 4, although the third note remains unchanged. Although this may seem like a very trivial difference that shouldn't affect the quality of the sound, it is actually used all the time by composers, because a minor chord often sounds very dark and gloomy, whereas a major chord sounds very bright and cheery. Similarly, just like a minor chord and a major chord are very similar, except that one note is played differently, a diminished chord and a minor chord are just like that as well, where the second note is still 3 semitones above the first note, but the third note is now 6 semitones rather than 7. This type of chord is often used by composers to add tension or dissonance to the track. And finally, the augmented chord is most similar to the major chord, except the difference here is that the second note stays the same, while the third note is 8 semitones rather than 7. And this creates a dissonance even stronger than the diminished chords provide, and is often used in horror movies and the like to get eerie sci-fi sounds. Sadly, not every instrument is able to create chords, however, for the simple reason that not every instrument has multiple parts that can vibrate in harmony with each other. For example, whereas a guitar or a violin has multiple strings for you to play chords on, and a piano or synthesizer has multiple keys for you to play chords on, something like human vocal cords would be a counterexample where there's no way to make multiple notes play at the same time, at least without studio effects applied to them. And so, for instruments that cannot play chords, you would instead play arpeggios, which are often called arpeggiated chords, or even more simply, broken chords, owing to the fact that they are composed out of the same exact notes as a chord. The only difference is an arpeggio plays the notes in quick succession rather than all at once. And you can also play arpeggios on instruments that can play chords as well. So for example, you can play an arpeggio on a guitar by plucking each string in quick succession rather than plucking all the strings at once and the chord that you're composing. Here's an example of me recording a major arpeggio using electronic pitch shifting on my voice. Here is an example with a minor chord broken down into its arpeggiated form. Notice the difference in the second pitch shifted note. Here is an example of me arpeggiating a diminished chord. As you listen, notice how the final note is shifted down one semitone, just like the second note in the last example. You may already be able to notice how in the first example, the sounds progressed in a way that felt happy and bright, but in this example, it sounds more tense and nervous. Similar to the violins used in many dramatic effects in horror movies. Here's a final example with an augmented chord converted to an arpeggio. Notice how the progression sounds even more dramatic than a diminished chord. Although there are many other chord types as well, these four are the most common throughout any genre of music, whether for games or otherwise. Now that I've begun moving on from working with sounds individually to arranging them in a musical composition, starting in this video, I will talk about formal time signatures in the next tutorial video, also commonly known as the meter of the song.
Don't forget to subscribe if you found this video informative, and make sure to see other tutorial videos, and follow me on either Facebook or Twitter for more content.